Everybody. Yes, I'm Marty Bennett, and I am in my hats I'm wearing tonight is with North Bay Working Families Party. And the hats I'm wearing tonight are with North Bay Working Families Party and Unite Here Local 2. And again, I want to thank so many Oakmonters who supported our campaign to organize the Fairmont Mission Inn, where we signed the first contract last year for 275 workers, and it was absolutely transformative. It is the first union hotel in the Sonoma Valley. Thank you again on that. So it's my honor to introduce our speaker. And I also want to point out that Working Families Party and another co-sponsor, Democratic Socialists of America. We have a table in the back, and there was also a third co-sponsor, Community United to Resist Fascism. Fred Glass was the communications director of the California Federation of Teachers for 30 years, and he taught labor history at the City College of San Francisco for 35 years. He wrote and directed a 10-part video series on the history of California labor movement called Golden Lands, Working Hands. His book on the same topic, From Mission to Microchip, was published by the University of California Press in 2016. His short animated cartoon, Tax the Rich, an animated fairy tale, received 1 million YouTube views and was the subject of unhappy Fox News commentary. Fred currently serves as the editor of California Red, the statewide publication of Democratic Socialists of America. He has been writing and making presentations about American fascism for a decade. He debates 23-year-old grandson twice a week. Please welcome Fred Glass.
Thank you. There's a brief technical adjustment going on, which didn't work. Well, let's launch anyway. Yes, the microphone is on. I'd like to thank Sonoma County Working Families Party, Sonoma County DSA, Community United to Resist Fascism, and especially the Oakmont Democratic Alliance for inviting me to talk about this critical topic. And a special thanks to my friend and comrade, Marty Bennett, for pulling all the parts together. For those of you already in the front lines of defense of immigrants, federal workers, our institutions of democracy, and many other areas of conflict, I commend you for your activism and your desire to analyze the nature of fascism, the better to fight it. I also thank all of you for being here tonight. At 40 minutes, this is a longer presentation than I usually do, and I recognize that it challenges the contemporary attention span. But I think the topic warrants the length. One caveat at the outset, I would love to be proven wrong that fascism is taking hold in America. If that's not what we're seeing, conversations like today's will prove to have been unnecessary, and we all could have been at home watching our favorite TV show. But if we are right, meetings like this are important, and better to be safe than sorry. We'll touch. Uh-oh. Okay, we have a little problem again.
Who's a problem?
Where's that other voice coming from?
Would everyone at home please mute your microphones on your computers?
in the Zoom window.
Oh, there we go. Okay, got it. Yeah. All right, we'll touch on 4 topics tonight. Theory, or how we know we're facing fascism, history, here and abroad, where I think we're at now, and my best guesses about what you can do about it. And you're going to help me with that last part. Let's start with a checklist to give us a sense of what we can usually find happening in a fascist movement or a society heading in that direction. Let's be clear that each time fascism appears, rooted in the specific history and culture of a country, its elements show up in various combinations, some more prominent than others, depending on where and when. Therefore, don't view this checklist as comprehensive or precise. As one scholar remarked, defining fascism is like trying to pin jelly to a wall. That said, it's a pretty good bet if you're running into a whole bunch of these checklist items, then you're running into fascism. Many descriptions and terms are being thrown around to describe what's happening in the United States right now. Authoritarianism, autocracy, oligarchy, dictatorship, police state, tyranny, etc. In one respect, it doesn't matter whether Donald Trump and the other MAGA leaders in charge of the federal government are fascists or simply corrupt authoritarian oligarchs. It's bad either way, and we need to get rid of them and their policies and turn around the social forces that gave rise to them. But I believe it does matter what we call what's happening here. On the practical level of how we defeat the enemy, effectively arguing Trump is a fascist on top of the fascist movement gives us an opening for political education. Once people are provided the conceptual tools to understand what fascism is, and every day we are receiving the data, an anti-fascist coalition will get bigger and broader as the mass demonstrations have begun to show. We have a teachable moment, and we should be using it to teach and to organize on that basis. If you're going to read one book, it's Robert Paxton's Anatomy of Fascism. This is the classic book in the field. He knows his history and works his way very carefully through case studies and explores various dimensions of fascism before he finally delivers his definition at the end of the book. Who will read this for us? Maybe somebody in the front row? Nice and slowly. Loudly. Thank you very much. That's a mouthful, but we will encounter examples of each part of this definition as we proceed here. I think Paxton gives us an excellent start. I'll just say that this leaves out a few things, like the role of the charismatic leader, probably because every political movement has them, and also because it would be hard to stuff everything significant about fascism into one sentence. I'd also swap out elites for something more precise, like conservative sectors of the capitalist class. Point being that any type of society or mode of production can and does have elites. Fascism is specifically a phenomenon of the capitalist mode of production. Elsewhere, Paxton proposes that a pretty universal precondition for fascism is a deadlocked or failing democratic system, although this doesn't make it into his definition either. More on that later. Paxton observes that fascism typically moves through 5 stages: birth of a movement, rooting in the political system, taking power, exercising power, and then over time, its motion toward either entropy or radicalization. Although he says these stages don't always all appear or happen in the same order, this seems like the sequence that makes the most sense and probably shows up the most frequently. I think of French avant-garde filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard who was once asked in an interview if he thought a film should have a beginning, middle, and end. He replied, yes, but not necessarily in that order. Going by Paxton's stages, where would you say we are at this moment in the United States? 4? That the consensus? I would say that there are elements of taking power still and exercising power, but certainly we're well on the way. A book published in 2024 had an interesting take on the question, saying maybe it isn't quite fascism yet. Richard Seymour's Disaster Nationalism examines historical fascism as well as contemporary far-right movements and governments around the world. Guided by Paxton's definition, which Seymour also thinks is the right starting point, he proposed that disaster nationalism is the path on which far-right movements travel to fascism. What he means by disaster nationalism is what happens today in a society afflicted by multiple forms of crisis. He defines disasters as being the obvious kinds like fires, floods, earthquakes, pandemics, and economic catastrophes like stock market crashes. But he also means the grinding effects over time of trends like climate destruction, structural racism, or changes in the capitalist mode of production, like corporate controlled automation and globalization that produce long-term unemployment. We might also include as disaster the policy failure to solve these crises when the political system is deadlocked, as we have here with an electoral system built by slave owners in the 18th century that actively prevents us from moving forward. These increasingly frequent disasters are weaponized by opportunistic politicians who scapegoat a minority population. They take the moment of crisis to launch a nationalist assault on that group, to jumpstart or further develop a far-right movement and run for office to take power on that basis. Once in office, they double down, inflaming the passions of a worried population and directing their fears into rage toward the scapegoat and redemptive violence against it. Seymour calls this process fascization, an unwieldy sort of neologism, but accurate, and points to places like India with Modi, Bolsonaro's Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines, and Israel with Netanyahu. Like any careful historian, he's cautious about diagnosing current events to draw a general conclusion. He brought out the book before Trump took office for the second time. I'm guessing he would now say we're no longer on the path. We're here. Having gotten started on theory, let's explore some recent history in its light. Neoliberalism is a conservative political philosophy that places markets über alles, but the term also refers to the period of global capitalism, the last half century, in which we have found ourselves ruled by that political philosophy. An English writer, William Davies, divides neoliberalism into 3 parts. Combative neoliberalism was the era of Reagan and Thatcher, in which internationally communism was rolled back, at home unions were attacked and weakened, and social democratic state programs and regulatory safeguards were gutted. Next came normative neoliberalism, Clinton and Blair, where it is assumed that capitalism is now and forever triumphant over rivals, socialism and communism. There's no more competition among systems, therefore, no more need of goodies to bribe the working class away from socialism, and austerity is the only way forward. This was the mantra coined by Thatcher and repeated ad nauseum. There is no alternative, or TINA. It wasn't true then, isn't now, but remains a phrase constantly used by politicians imposing or defending austerity. Finally, after the crash of 2007-8, the Great Recession, and taxpayer-funded bailouts of the big banks when it became clear that neoliberal ideas had failed, we enter what Davies called punitive neoliberalism, in which rational arguments defending neoliberalism are shown to be so riddled with contradictions. It's good for everyone. Austerity for thee, but not for me. Enormous and growing economic inequality. as to be nonsensical, yet it continues to stagger on with growing crises of its own making that can't be resolved on its own terms. It's irrational. Social rules begin to break down. People begin to revolt. I think of Occupy and Black Lives Matter. But without a strong left to institutionalize the gains of the progressive movements and make the case for democratic socialism, the movements recede and fascism sticks its head in the door. So circling back, here's how disaster nationalism fits together with neoliberalism. It's the mechanism over the last 10 or 15 years by which global neoliberalism, country by country, morphs toward fascism. Having said that, I do want to insist on some wiggle room here. History doesn't proceed from one neat little box to the next. The real world is a bit messier than that. This is a trend, not a rigid formula. We'll return to history in a moment, but first let's go a little deeper into the theory. We've started with Paxton's definition and we've elaborated. That's good background, but let's make it more user-friendly and boil it down. Let's say that fascism has three aspects. It's an ideology, a mass movement, and a type of capitalist government. One at a time. While fascist ideology is simple, even simplistic, in its content, the mechanisms by which it delivers that content are complicated. Ideology is a system of ideas. As Marx and Engels say in the German ideology, the ruling ideas of an age are generally speaking the ideas of the ruling class. But other systems of ideas can coexist and challenge the ruling ideas. The three great political ideologies born out of the capitalist mode of production up until World War I were conservatism, liberalism, and socialism. The first two competed on the best way to run the system. The third, produced by the system's contradictions, proposed to replace it with something better. These were relatively coherent worldviews. Fascism is not. This ideology proclaims its love for freedom while it constricts and destroys it. It accuses other parties of corruption as it loots the store. It offers shifting explanations for its actions. These contradictions can be quite puzzling until you see the pattern. Fascists ascribe intentions to the scapegoated minority or any of its opponents that are actually the intentions of the fascists themselves. Doing this sows confusion, focuses attention away from its actions, and adds to the sense of chaos, over which the movement and the leader can provide the only true interpretation and solution. One recent example, there are actually many in just the last week, but following Charlie Kirk's murder, Trump and the entire right-wing media apparatus jumped on the idea that the left has created an atmosphere of violence in America. Unlike the other ideologies, fascism only arrived on the scene with the great disruptions of World War I and the threat of socialist revolution, to which it was a direct response. Referring back to our checklist, the content of fascist ideology is hyper-nationalist, xenophobic, racist, misogynist, and obsesses about what a pure nation should be, and therefore also obsesses on how to cast out the impure. Think of Trump's references to immigrants and leftists as vermin, a direct echo of the terminology used by historical fascism to brand its scapegoats as unclean and impure. He is well aware the verb you think of in chain of association with vermin is exterminate. Fascism is an opportunistic ideology. Take the recent focus of the Republican Party on what they call anti-Semitism, which they intentionally conflate with anti-Zionism. This is a party that since the McCarthy era and before, and up through today, has been happy to harbor anti-Semites along with other bigots. Anti-Semitism has a long and intimate connection with fascism. But today, you're an anti-Semite if you protest Israeli genocide in Gaza. About the actual anti-Semites, excuse me, who chant, "Jews shall not replace us," Trump can only say there are good people on both sides. In terms of fascism's followers, German communist leader Claire Zetkin said in 1923, So at the very beginning of fascism taking power in one country. Fascism is a movement of the hungry, the suffering, the disappointed, and those without a future. She also said at that very early stage, fascism is the punishment inflicted on the proletariat for not having continued the revolution begun in Russia. And if you're not aware of that history, there were a number of failed revolutions around Europe immediately following World War I in the wake of the Russian Revolution. In an analogy that might seem a stretch, but I would argue for, we might translate her insight for the here and now. Fascism is the punishment inflicted on America for not having continued on the path blazed by Bernie Sanders. Fascism, in supplying its audience with an explanation as to why they are anxious and fearful, further stokes these feelings in order to diminish its listeners' capacity to think in more complex ways about the changes occurring around them. When you're afraid and angry, it's harder to think clearly and easier to believe your grievance is caused by trans people or immigrants. And it's easier to make the scapegoating stick when there is no consistent opposing message that teaches about the wrecking of our society by billionaires in pursuit of profit. Also central to fascist ideology is the nuclear family. I love nuclear families. I'm in one myself. But for fascists, there is only one kind of family: dad, mom, and kids. The fascist family is anti-feminist, homophobic, and transphobic because these alternative forms of sexuality and gender might stand in the way of producing more babies for master race supremacy and overcoming the so-called great replacement of whites by people of color. The current censorship, or what I call book burning craze in schools and libraries, and parallel push against bathrooms that best match the identity of the people that use them are rooted in fascist family ideology. The family shows up in other ways, in the hidden internal mechanisms of fascist ideology production and consumption. Fascism encourages a psychology of envy that says, we're under attack, and they are taking things away that are rightfully ours, and they don't deserve them, and we do. We're going to take those things back and go back to the good old days when we had everything we needed and those bad people weren't there. This stoking of envy relies upon a specific psychological structure, nostalgia for childhood. The hazily defined once upon a time of MAGA reaches back toward the idea of a nation's innocence lost, which unconsciously parallels the imaginary micro-utopia consisting of our own early memories and feelings. This psychology is powerful not because the ideas are complex, just the opposite. It's powerful because its emotional mechanism is deeply embedded in our personal internal scaffolding and history. Simple and primitive, it depends for its impact on how we understood the world when we were small children. On the one hand, buffeted by uncontrollable feelings like envy, rage, helplessness, hate, and grievance before we learned to master those feelings. And on the other, the need to be taken care of by our seemingly all-powerful, all-loving mothers and fathers. Although, to be clear, for fascism, it's just the father who's all-powerful. This unconscious psychological position also closely relates to the envious feelings that young kids might feel toward the sibling who seems to be favored in a family with an emotional economy of scarcity. If these unreflected on feelings are successfully channeled toward a scapegoat, we've got trouble. Usually there's a conspiratorial element to the scapegoating, tapping our mind's capacity for paranoia. As the old joke goes, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean someone isn't after me. The element of material truth fundamental to the success of fascist ideology and movements is that people actually are experiencing problems. They are hurting in various ways. That's not a delusion. And neither is their belief that there are people plotting to do this to them. There are, just not the ones they are being told to believe there are. Capitalism breeds the problems afflicting people. disasters piled upon disasters by its very nature. To paraphrase Marx in Capital, accumulation of wealth at one pole is at the same time accumulation of misery at the opposite pole. And while capitalism is a system, it's run by actual capitalists who, despite their monstrous function in the system, are people. Everyone understands that there are powerful social forces out there in the world, but without proper political education, they don't know to whom or what to attribute their problems. This makes them vulnerable to conspiracy theories, dehumanization of the other, scapegoating, and ultimately, as the fascist movement grows, calls to violence on that basis. Fascist movement, if successful, redirects individual grievances or legitimate feelings arising from one's own oppression toward a false object. The feelings get reassigned to the designated racialized other. And fascist propagandists build a mass movement out of that displacement. The fascist playbook specifically focuses, this is, of course, a look over their tactic. It's the oldest trick in the capitalist handbook to divide and conquer the working class in every way possible. 19th century railroad baron Jay Gould admitted this in an uncharacteristically direct way. The fascist playbook specifically focuses the divide and conquer tactic through the lens of anti-immigrant xenophobia to create that scapegoated other. In so doing, it encourages mass violence, but also random violence through an atmosphere of violent rhetoric. Most lone wolf mass shootings are carried out by young right-wing men who have spent too much time on toxic websites. A fearful public, afraid of the scapegoated, dehumanized other, is a public ready to receive a message, converting the fear into anger and action, and ready to embrace a movement that promises to help them do that. The main thing distinguishing fascism from other forms of authoritarianism is the movement aspect of it. A military dictatorship that takes power in a coup may look and act like fascism in power, but the tension that can exist between a fascist government and the fascist movement that got it there is not something that a military dictatorship per se has to deal with. This is why Franco's Spain, for instance, was not strictly speaking a fascist country, although people generally understood it that way. The Spanish Fascist Party, the Falange, was a very minor factor in General Franco's defeat of the left in the Spanish Civil War, and he was quite successful in marginalizing its influence. He took power via military victory, not an election on the back of a movement. This may feel like a distinction without a difference if you happen to be on the wrong end of violence from any type of authoritarian regime. But it matters in terms of how we think about and develop our tactics and strategies to prevent fascism from fully establishing itself. If we were simply confronting a military coup from the top down in a police state, we'd have no choice but to organize an underground resistance. And who knows, it may come to that. But with fascism still installing itself, and while we still possess substantial remnants of American democratic institutions, there are important and usable tools at our disposal to help us organize an anti-fascist movement to counter the temporarily dominant fascist one. As we've suggested, the recent ascension of fascism has its roots in the failures of neoliberalism, but proto-fascist movements, pioneering many of its elements, can be traced back to the mid-19th century. These, what one writer, Alberto Toscano, calls the fascism before fascism, prepared some of the methods taken up by the classic variety. These include various forms of racial domination, especially settler colonialism, within the imperialist world order. In the southern United States, demobilized soldiers brought together by demagogues became the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK can be understood as a localized proto-fascist movement backed by Southern plantation capital that arose to reframe African Americans as the social other and roll back Reconstruction. This soon became the armed basis of Jim Crow, a racial fascism that held the reins of regional governmental power for decades and inspired Hitler. Similar movement dynamics, but at a national scale, underpinned the classic examples of European fascism in the early to mid-20th century, Germany and Italy. Poorly educated former soldiers without economic prospects were melded together with impoverished or downwardly mobile middle classes through grievance-laden anti-socialist and anti-Semitic rhetoric and became the shock troops of the multi-class fascist movement, directed by their leaders to violent assault alongside electoral activities. This bears more than a passing resemblance to recent events here, when Trump called his movement into a violent but failed insurrection in January 2021 over his lost election. Veterans comprised around a fifth of the mob, compared with 6% of the general population. Most people, if they have a picture in their heads of fascism, tend to think of what it looks like midstream and don't think historically about its ascension or path to power. The path typically runs through elections accompanied by rising tides of violence. These elections tend to take place within the context of a bloc democracy. In Italy in the 20s and Germany in the 30s, neither the traditional center-left nor center-right coalition forces were able to vanquish the other. This led to polarization and an inability to decisively address the most important challenges afflicting the society, a process aided through mistakes made by the left. Most importantly, the German communists labeling the Social Democrats, these were the two largest parties in Germany at the time, the German communists labeling the Social Democrats social fascists, portraying them as bad as the Nazis or worse. The inability of the left to unite directly led to the fascists in power. Fascism in state power represents a breakthrough solution in the wrong direction toward the most reactionary sectors of capital to resolve fundamental social issues and blockages in capitalist development. In Italy, fascism was an attempted solution to the backwardness of the rural economy in the South. In Germany, a response to the crushing burden of war debt. Here and now, fascism is attempting to shore up antiquated political structures like the Electoral College bequeathed to us by the founders' concessions to the slaveocracy, and reassert the death grip of fossil fuel capital over our planet's future that was slowly beginning to give way to renewable energy. Violence, whether in the form of officially sanctioned state violence or non-state extra-legal forms of violence, is always lurking in every stage of capitalism, an economic system based on compulsion and exploitation. But with fascism, the violence emerges as a central presence, rather than a threat in the background or occasional suppression of a strike or people's uprising. Fascism in power is characterized by a bulking up of the state repressive apparatus alongside rhetorical attacks on the helping functions of government, destroying or at least reducing legislative and legal agencies, social welfare, and regulatory guardrails created to reduce corporate harm to individuals and society. These government helping functions are slandered as waste, fraud, and abuse as they're being decimated. Some welfare and helping functions may remain, but scaled down and their benefits redefined by loyalty to leader and fascism, not democratic principle. Fascism in power is also invariably represented by attacks on civil society, that is, the free press, labor, scientific inquiry, and other independent forms of thought and association, anything that smells like the possibility of resistance. All three aspects of fascism that we've described, its ideology, movements, its form of capitalist governments, all of them promote violence, both legal and extra-legal, rhetorical and literal, against the left and racialized scapegoats, which, whether accurately or not, are identified or associated with the left. Once in power and moving to consolidate it, fascist regimes adopt a tactic called preventive counter-violence. The fascist leader identifies a supposed dangerous situation, a crisis that can only be controlled with the repressive apparatus of the state. This provides the excuse needed for escalation of repression, fuels the cycle of fear and anger, and potentially prepares the way for martial law. Fascism and state power isn't something entirely new or unique in the capitalist mode of production, rather an exaggeration of tendencies already in place. It is the repudiation of the supposedly organic connection between democracy and capitalism, touted by the system's apologists since the time of the Russian Revolution. It's the assertion, for example, by billionaire Peter Thiel, that democracy and freedom, by which he means freedom to exploit, are incompatible. All of the divisiveness, the scapegoating, the repression is there not only to inflame the fascist base, but to draw attention away from the fundamental fact that capital, a tiny fraction of the population, is growing enormously richer. For instance, from climate destruction, while the rest of us burn. And by the way, there's a bibliography that you can pick up at the table back there if you haven't already. I refer you to the article by Naomi Klein that's listed in there with what people like Peter Thiel are up to. When Trump pardoned the 1,600 January 6th conspirators, he sent a clear message about his plan. It went beyond the hint in his debate response about the Proud Boys, stand back and stand back and stand by. The pardon said that should Trump be restrained by law or elections or massive public protest, he could call upon these lawless, violent people. A key indicator for where we were at that moment in the slide toward fascism was the message that fascist militants were safe from legal consequences for violent action. But at this moment, he has no need for a private assault apparatus. He has ICE, whose budget he tripled this year. He is showing a preference for testing the boundaries of how the various official armed forces might be deployed on American soil, rather than using private militias. And why not? Trained violence professionals are more reliable than the ragtag groupings of far-right lunatics that assaulted the Capitol on January 6th, and more legitimate in the eyes of the American public. The people involved in January 6th represent the movement's bottom, so to speak, of the fascization process. At the top, we've got what Paxton described as the uneasy accommodation of elites with fascism, becoming a lot less uneasy. As represented in the iconic photo at Trump's inauguration, where Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg et al., billionaires who all opposed Trump before and during his first administration, show that they are now fully on board. Filling in between top and bottom, let's conclude our examination of emerging American fascism with a quick and very partial listing of significant events in the first 9 months of Trump and the MAGA movement in office. I'll just let this sit here for a moment. And of course, this doesn't even include the recent events in Venezuela and the ocean next door. It doesn't include the reaching in with a gun into a car and shooting of an innocent woman. It doesn't, because it keeps piling up day by day and week by week. So let me highlight one bullet in the middle since we haven't talked about it yet, and that's the assault on federal unions, the largest union busting effort in United States history, making the Patco firings of 1981 look like small potatoes. What's all this signify? In our historical moment, fascism is taking root in America. What I've drawn for you today is not a pretty picture. But you knew that before you came here. There's another side to the story, and let's remind ourselves where we are at in developing an anti-fascist movement. There are 4 main lines of defense against the fascist assault: the courts, state and local government, the 2026 elections, and broadly speaking, the streets, the most important of the 4. The success of all of these will depend on our ability to create the strongest and broadest possible coalition in an anti-fascist front. This in turn is dependent on the ability of our side to mobilize public opinion and transform it into active opposition. Current polling and the recent election cycle show that Trump and the actions of the Republican Congress are deeply unpopular. The question is whether we can seize the opportunity to educate, agitate, and organize on a large enough scale to win this November. Young people, especially, as we saw in DSA, can play an outsized role in making this happen. As we saw with Zoran Mondani's victory in New York City. A key task here is developing the progressive activist base for Democratic Party candidates and maintaining and growing it after the election. This was the big mistake, of course, that Obama made in 2008, which was demobilizing something that had become a movement. It wasn't there anymore. And 2 years later, then you have the rise of the Tea Party and nothing to counter it. The courts are a mixed bag. Many decisions have at least temporarily halted and continue to halt some of the worst abuses of the administration, but Trump has also won many. With the right-wing Supreme Court as final arbiter and Trump's selective willingness to ignore lower court decisions, legal remedy is essentially a holding action, slowing down the fascist train, which is important, but not sufficient. State and local government in blue states like California and Illinois can help protect vulnerable populations and support anti-fascist organizing, as Newsom did with Prop 50, and local leaders like Barbara Lee in Oakland and Karen Bass in LA have done in reinforcing their city's policies of non-cooperation with ICE. Even in red states, actions by legislators in the minority can at least slow down the onslaught, as we saw in Texas when Democratic legislators left the state for a few weeks to delay the gerrymandering of congressional districts. And where progressives are in office, we provide steel for their backbone to do things like order local law enforcement to refuse help for federal kidnappings and other forms of official violence. Again, maybe not everywhere or permanently, but long enough to make a real difference and help keep people safe for a while. That while that we are talking about, first and foremost, is the 2026 elections. This is absolutely critical. The best path to power for the working class is always through building it from the bottom up, through organizing in workplaces and communities, from one-on-one to mass communications, and with every tool at our disposal, including electoral politics. Every Californian who understood this and wanted to stop fascism jumped on the special election for Proposition 50 in response to the Texas gerrymander. No one likes gerrymandering as a concept, but political power is not abstract moralizing. It's concrete and contextual. The concrete situation, which 2/3 of the electorate in California understood, was either we win or the fascist takeover will continue. Let me be as clear as possible. If we do not take back at least one House of Congress in fall 2026, we are toast. Our room to maneuver in this society will narrow drastically. The margins in each house are razor thin. Winning is doable, but it will take focus, hard work, and forcing Democratic Party leadership to understand the lessons of Mamdani's campaign and move to the left. Alongside of these tools, and to make all of this possible, there's the street. What do I mean by that? We must continue to organize the big national demonstrations and build them bigger. The last one was arguably the largest single-day turnout in U.S. history. Many groups are working on this, including local DSA and Working Family Party chapters. And if you haven't yet joined in with one of them, that's a task. The big demonstrations make visible and clear the disapproval of the public for the direction the country is taking and reinforce the sense that we, the people, have the power if we figure out how to use it. That's momentum that we need to sustain. As of yet, there is no one coordinated organizing center for these actions. Indivisible, a liberal Democratic Party-oriented group, has pleasantly surprised me with its ability to turn people out and gradually take on coalition partners. But thus far, it doesn't have the connections with enough constituencies or a strong enough tilt to the left to be that organizing center. Although smaller, a group that has made headway toward this goal is May Day Strong, which is based in left and grassroots labor organizations and with relatively minimal resources commands enough attention that national labor leaders like the AFL-CIO's Liz Schuler and AFT's Randy Weingarten have spoken at recent Zoom meetings attended by over 1,000 people. Especially important about May Day Strong is that it is explicitly oriented toward building the mass strikes on May Day 2028, in line with what United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain's call for unions to line up their contracts. Something went wrong with my verb in the sentence. Let's start over here. Especially important about May Day Strong is that it is explicitly oriented toward building to mass strikes on May Day 2028, in line with United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain's call for unions to line up their contracts to expire together on that day. But when we talk about the street, I don't just mean big demonstrations. It also means various sizes and shapes of nonviolent direct action, or NVDA. These are crucial in the construction of any successful mass progressive social movement. Through NVDA, you find you can do things like stop traffic, occupy a bank or a corporate headquarters, protect immigrants from deportation, or shut down a work site or an industry. Strikes are a form of NVDA. Militant NVDA tactics help to grow the historic labor, civil rights, feminist, queer, disabled, anti-nuke, and anti-war movements, every single one of them. NVDA puts the heat in street heat, and when there are enough people doing it, it can be an enormous boost to the cause. The most successful forms of people power in resisting authoritarian takeovers have arisen when NVDA and mass action develop together and coordinate. Recent writing by people like Jeremy Brecker about what he calls social strikes urge taking this approach. For organizations, success in the street requires internal and external organizing, both. Internally, through recruitment, education, and training, and externally, talking to strangers and activating them for the cause. It requires organizations talking in good faith with other organizations to build broad coalitions around our common interests and needs. Within a broad, united, anti-fascist front, and this is hard for many on the left to hear, this includes working with groups with whom we may have disagreements on any number of other issues, but with whom we agree on the centrality of the anti-fascist fight. It will be in these activities and others that we generate the momentum and confidence of a mass-based anti-fascist movement, equally ready to surround a government building to stop its business as usual, or go canvassing door to door to take back Congress. If we're doing all this properly, we will be strengthening and building democratic socialist organizing and people power going forward. American fascism may have arrived with Trump's election, but with smart, consistent, and dedicated work, we can and will make the moment that we're in a temporary detour from our necessary path to a better world. Thank you for listening. You want to moderate?
Thank you so much. There's a lot to think about, and for each one of us to consider what we're going to be doing. You might have, not everybody can go out and I'm talking as loud as I can. Not everyone can go to these protests. We don't have the strength or the ability, but what can you do? Email your grandkids, get them on board, make them hear what you have to say. So let's take a few minutes. If you're take a few questions, you might have a question or two. So let's keep it to questions and not long comments, please. Just questions. Call it out, and one of us will repeat it. Okay. Who has a question? Raise your hand, please. Yes, please go ahead. Okay. 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 Thank you. Okay. Get. Okay. Okay. And raise your hand in the back just to, and say who your name is again. She pointed at you. I'm sorry, gentlemen. Okay. All right. So if you have any questions or anything, please get to these people before you leave. Yes. I'm repeating it. Okay, as much as I possibly can. Okay. All right. Let's get to a question. Yes. And I'll repeat your question. Yes. Mm. Okay. Marty, where are you? Marty, can you, his question has to do with how do you have to register to vote the Working Families Party? Do you want to just say something about what is required of someone? They just want to know a little bit more information about it.
Right. Working Families Party, you can become a member. And we've got a Q code in the back where you can pay $10 a month and you can become a member. You sign our sign up list, you can become involved in our monthly activities. But there's no contradiction between being a member of the Democratic Party and a member of the Working Families Party. Our goal is from inside and outside to transform the Democratic Party. And of course, the election of Zoran Mandami, Working Families Party, and DSA played a major role in making that happen. No, 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 there's not.
That was a great clarification. Thank you very much. How about another question? Go ahead. Yeah, why don't you repeat that? I'm sorry.
She was talking about how
Where'd
the,
you come from?
like, I'm just going to use an example, Harris County, which is definitely blue, is being audited or being challenged that it was a fair election. And she was saying that if they do this, if they sue or if they go after the county, and the they being the administration, then that a county won't be able to be counted in the next election, which would be in November. Is that true?
No, it's illegal to be disenfranchised like that. But that doesn't mean that the Trump administration and the Abbott administration in Texas won't try to do something like that. Let me answer it this way. There are going to be a lot of those kinds of efforts to intimidate people in one way or another not to vote in 2026. And so if there are any lawyers in the crowd here who can get around on their 2 feet, helping in all those situations is one thing to do. We are going to have to be more vigilant than we've ever been for this election in terms of the disenfranchisement, the possible disenfranchisement in various ways all across the country. So I think this is one tactic that they're trying out in Texas. They're throwing everything they can against the wall and seeing what sticks.
A question or two?
I'm an Oakmonter, and like most of you in here, you're all baby boomers, as I am. Okay, can you hear me better? Okay, I've got my hearing aids on. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, there was a young woman who earlier talked about the fact that 12 people put this event together. 12 people have been working in the Democratic Party, the Alliance, and the Progressives to make things happen. Most of us here sit in our lazy boy recliners and make comments about what's going on. Activism is required. It's nice to be here. It's comfortable. We learned a lot from the professor there about fascism. Our parents, our fathers and mothers went through the Depression and fought fascism, fought it. And that's how things get done. You struggle, you fight, you organize, and get off that lazy boy. And so I know I've got aches and pains like many of you, and talk about Kaiser and Sutter and all the rest of the healthcare issues we're going through. But you got to get off your butts, take a chance, and get involved.
Thank you.
Jeff, how many people roughly you think are on our list for Alliance and whatnot? I mean, just guess. Okay, so I just want to know that there's not just 12 people coming to things. So please come to our meetings, get on the list. I hit her in the back just a minute. So anyway, I just want to emphasize that. And it's lovely to hear.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ravel. I was wondering if you have any suggestions for folks who are indeed leftists, who struggle to work with people across the political divide. I'm thinking like,
Maoists, Maoists and Trotskyists.
sure. I mean, I'm thinking like differences with regards to Palestine. There's a number of like issues where, I mean, it seems like people have a blind spot when it comes to Democrats.
So I was going door to door in Arizona and Nevada in the last election cycle for Kamala Harris. I didn't love Kamala Harris that much. I didn't love Joe Biden that much, but I recognized the difference between their politics and the possibilities of still having a democracy if they got elected versus what we would get with Trump. And so I went out there in order to try and get, what some people would call the lesser of two evils. I wouldn't put it that way, as a friend of mine, Jackie Goldberg, who was on the school board until recently in Los Angeles, once put it. What, you want the worster of two evils? The dropping away of 5 to 7 million young people from the electorate between 2020 and 2024, was no doubt principally over Gaza. And that kind of single issue focus is not helpful in this moment. I greatly respect the people going out on the streets trying to stop the genocide, and I understand the pain of people who have friends and relatives there as this is going on. But that's just part of the picture. This is the United States president, the United States government is something that rules over the United States as well as the empire. And we need here in this country to have the room to move, to push our government to do the right thing. We don't have that room to move at this particular point in time. And if we do not take back at least one House of Congress in 2026, as I said before, we're toast. So this is what I would say to friends on the left who have a single-minded focus. You have to broaden it out right now. Learn about fascism. learn what it actually looks like, and see how it strangles any possibility for a better world.
Be louder than that.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Maurice Parker. I'm here with my wife. We're residents of Sonoma, and we were invited by Marty Bennett to come and join. I have a very basic question, and it expands upon what this young man stated a few moments ago. As we look around this room and as we look at the marches in Santa Rosa and Napa and Sonoma and throughout the United States, if we look at the demographics of the people there, they're people our age. As a professor at City College of San Francisco, and I'm an alumnus of that campus in Berkeley, my question is, what is happening on the campuses? What is happening with the young people? How do you pass your message on? I deeply respect what you stated. My son tells me the same thing. What are you telling the young people, and what are you observing on the campuses here in California and elsewhere?
Good question. If you go to the demonstrations in my part of the world, in the East Bay, there are a lot of young people that are coming to them. And the organization that I'm working in, I'm not reflective of the general demographics. You know, DSA is an organization now of about 100,000 people around the country, and it's 90% people in their 20s and 30s. So I would say in terms of the campuses, well, this is one of the symptoms of what's going on right now with the alteration of our political system. There are the shutting down of free speech in the name of, quote, anti-Semitism is being horribly destructive of the ability of students to feel free to express themselves. And this is part of the decay that is being perpetrated by fascism on the civic institutions of our society. There are people, certainly young people on the campuses who are active, who come out to the demonstrations and so on, but on campuses themselves, it's very tough right now. You might have seen in the news a week or so ago, the philosophy professor in Texas, who was told that he can't teach Plato because Plato has gender affirming ideology. It would be hilarious, except that's the shutting down of free speech right there. And multiply that 10,000-fold across the country. So people are resisting on the campuses. You don't read a lot about that. I mean, this is another problem, is that the mainstream media, the institution of the free press, the fourth estate, supposedly a pillar of democracy, is eroding also, and has been for the last 25 years. It's partially the fault of the web eroding its advertising base, but it's also partially the result of a very dedicated assault by hedge funds to come in and strip legacy media of assets and then push them down the gutter. So we're not getting the news we need to get. Something like, I can't remember the figure, it changes all the time, gets worse and worse, but there are thousands and thousands of local newspapers that have gone out of business over the last period of time. So we have to find the ways to rebuild media, whether it takes place in social media or wherever it takes place. Yes.
Ready? Okay. I'm Louise. I'm one of the 12 that put these things on. I have a couple of things to say. One is, I hope that some of you will come, can you hear me? To the social meeting on the 22nd of this month. I am halfway through the book, which I intended to read a while back, actually, on abundance, but it's very, very interesting, well worth reading, well worth discussing. Because Ezra Klein and his buddy, Derek Thompson, are really smart, and they see some of the flaws in the construction of our society that can be played on. So the other thing I want to say is that I think that the COVID pandemic had a hugely disruptive effect on the world, and we're not talking about it. And that concerns me a lot because everybody went inward, and especially the young people went inward. Jonathan Haidt has written a book called The Anxious Generation that talks about that. If anybody's interested, it's a very good book. There are videos by him. But I encourage everyone, talk to your grandkids, talk to the people you know, get conversation going, because we need to communicate and to heal the social fabric that was disrupted massively by COVID and by the internet revolution, which has happened simultaneously and is very dangerous in some ways. Love it, but it's dangerous. So there.
Thank you, Louise. And I would love to get a hand or two people who are in the back here that are visiting us and bring a different perspective. Here we go. Here's a hand right here.
Thank you for being here. Sorry? Yes, my name is Gabriel. Gabriel, that's easier. I wear many hats. I'm with the Mendocino County Democratic Party, a new member of the DSA, joining the Working Families Party. I'm a Granger as well, help out with Indivisible Ukiah, college student as well, so I can go on. But I wanted to thank you, first of all, for the presentation, very informative. And you also highlighted the failures of the fourth estate, basically the media complicity in this regime by stonewashing everything that's happening and making it seem like, oh, it's not that bad, or, well, you know, it looks bad. But my question that I want to ask is, concerning the fact that the Democratic Party as a whole has record low approval levels, and I think the reason that we did so well in this elections this past year was the backlash to the Trump regime and all the internal contradictions of fascism, as you mentioned. How do you think that the people can best make sure to end this fascist regime when it seems like it is growing more unpopular by the day, and it's going to lash out more violently, as we've seen the past week?
The four tactics that I laid out in the last section of my talk, all of those have to be happening. They have to be happening and they have to scale up. And if we're going to stop MAGA and roll it back, we just have to be bigger than they are. We are, but as the brother said over there, the lazy boy problem is central to this. We may be the majority, but we have to be out there being the majority. One important part of this, and I touched on it in the talk, but I'll just say a couple more things about it right now, is that the labor movement is at a historic low point right now in terms of its density. That's typically the backbone of any resistance to an authoritarian regime. And only 10% of the working class is organized in unions right now in the United States, down from its peak of about a third, 50, 60 years ago. There are signs within the labor movement that there's a renaissance. There is increased militancy over the last 6 or 7 years in many sectors. There's a lot of new organizing that's going on. And in particular, I mentioned Sean Fain, the head of the United Auto Workers, and his call for a national general strike on May 1st, 2028. That doesn't mean, when I say this to people, they say, we can't wait that long. We're going to be 6 feet under. That's not what he meant. He didn't mean we're going to suddenly rise up on May 1st, 2028. What he did that's different than any kind of frivolous call for a general strike that seems to pop up anytime a bad thing happens in the world, people say, let's have a general strike. Well, it's different to say, let's organize a general strike, and here's how. And the here's how that he handed us was all the unions need to line up their contracts for expiration on May 1st, 2028. He said this before Trump took power. This was just on behalf of working class power in the United States in general, since we've hit down as far as 10%. We need to go back up again. And this was one of his ideas for changing. So in order to get to May 1st, 2028, we have to start now. We have to start with May 1st, 2026, then go to the election in November, and use every opportunity we have to create stepping stones toward May 1st, 2028. No general strike has ever occurred that's been successful anywhere in the world without it being the crest of a wave of mass actions. And that's what we need to build between now and then. It's all going to be part of the solution. But to me, coming out of the labor movement, that's key, is getting the labor movement engaged, organizing so it's larger, and then doing the kind of action that it took to build the labor movement in the first place, which are things like general strikes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karim Sanchez, he, him pronouns. I'm with the Grayton Day Labor Center. We are a local affiliate of the National Day Labor Organizing Network. And there's been a call out to folks to adopt a corner. So we are actively organizing to resist fascism here in our county by protecting day laborers. As you might know, they stand out in our community in different areas that are not Home Depots. And if you are interested in being a volunteer, that essentially goes out in the morning before they do, and we set up a watch in case you see any ICE activity. We have a system to alert folks so that then we can take further action from there. So if you are an early morning riser and sitting in a car watching traffic sounds appealing to you, you could get involved by Googling NDLON. That's NDLON for the National Day Laborer Organizing Network, and adopt a corner. It'll take you to their website where you can type in your zip code and see all of the adopt a corners near you. There are 3 in Sonoma County. If you email that link, you will get onto a waiting list for you to be vetted and be added to the team. So thank you, Marty, for the invite. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for that information. So, all right, let's take one more question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Estelle. I'm one of the Sonoma County DSA co-chairs. I just want to say to everyone here today, thank you all for being here. This was a collaboration event between us and Working Families Party. And a lot of what we believe has already been said. You know, get involved, do something, give 1 or 2 hours a week. It's better 1,000 people give 2 hours a week than the same 10 people to giving 20, 30 hours, 50 hours a week. So we are in this engagement long term. And my question is to all of you. Will you be willing to say that to yourself today and say, can I give 1 or 2 hours this week? Join something. If you've not already joined, ask your friends, tell your family, come talk to us. We, Sonoma County DSA, are some of the youngest people in the county actively participating on a day-to-day basis. I've been in this chapter for 13 months and I haven't let up. And I tend to bring as many people as I can with me because I've started with 92 members. Now we have 316 members, and that's just the beginning. So there are so many things to plug into. And trust me, there are people who are passionate and have a vision who will help you guys get there. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, everyone. And do you have any last word? Or are you pretty much out of words?
If you don't like the history that you've got, go out and make some of your own.
Okay, there you go. See you around.